As access to tech increased in the 90s and early 2000s, conversations about the future of work highlighted the changing nature of leadership expectations, as employees placed higher value on their senses of morale, engagement, and job satisfaction. In researching what led to these changes, SNYDER found that employees reporting to LGBTQ+ managers had higher levels of satisfaction, engagement, and morale than other employees. In the 15 years since the publication of his research in the G quotient, how have LGBTQ+ leaders responded to the needs of the workforce? As we undergo tremendous change in the last 2 years, navigating a global pandemic, an increase in racially motivated hate crimes, adapting to remote work, how are LGBTQ+ leaders equipped to respond to evolving employee expectations and needs? This session, moderated by SNYDER, author of the G Quotient and Finding Work You Love, features senior LGBTQ+ leaders across various industries sharing their personal experiences at work.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel. I'm SNYDER, and I'm going to serve as your moderator today. I'm really excited to be here with these amazing people because I have a long history with Out and Equal. I'm a professor at the University of Southern California, business communication professor, and I'm also currently the chair of the Department of Business Communication. And 20 years ago, not quite, almost, I wrote a really interesting, I thought, other people seem to as well, career book for the LGBTQ+ community. And it was called Lavender Road to Success. And Out and Equal was nice enough to give me recognition and ask me to come and speak. As a professor, one of my research areas is career development. And being a member of the LGBTQ+ community myself, I really started to take a look and see what were the ingredients that contributed to success in the workplace for our community. And that book led to another book called the G Quotient and my work in this field. So I just wrote a new book called Finding Work You Love that just came out from Penguin Random House. And it's very much built around the principle of being rewarded for who you are by what you do. And that is absolutely embracing of sexual orientation, of gender identification, of all of these human value points that we all bring to the workplace. So I'm very excited to be here again with this amazing group to explore the power, the superpower that being part of this community has in the world of work, and looking at inclusion, looking at equality, and what we can do to make sure that we are maximizing the human value, the value that we all bring to the contemporary job market. So that's enough about me. And I'm really excited to share with you a little overview of all of our folks today. And then I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, and we are going to dive into some really great questions. So again, thank everyone on the panel for being here, and thank you Out and Equal for inviting me and for putting together this, what I believe is a very important panel for the conference. First, I would like to thank Beck Bailey for being here. Beck brings over 20 years of corporate, nonprofit, and entrepreneurial experience to his role as Managing Director of Inclusion and Diversity at Accenture. And most recently, Beck served as the Director of the Workplace Equality Program at HRC. Next, Patty Dingle. Patty serves as Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Americas for BNY Mellon. And throughout her career, Patty has focused on expanding global belonging efforts and drives initiatives with an intersectional focus, and particularly as they relate to optimizing a diverse talent pipeline. Next, Stephen Huey. Stephen is Out and Equal's Senior Director of Corporate Engagement, and it's not often that the Out and Equal team serves on these panels, but we had to bring in Stephen's perspective spanning corporate and nonprofit roles. Because in his current role, Stephen manages and builds Fortune 1000 and government relationships with a focus on strategic relationship building. And prior to joining Out and Equal, Stephen served as Senior Vice President and Marketing Manager for Bank of America's Community Development Bank. And Chris Messiah. Chris is a software engineer and vice president at JP Morgan Chase, with a long, successful career in the technology field that began in the US Navy. So with that amazing group of people, this is going to be quite the panel, I believe. And I now would like to turn the floor over to each member of the panel and hear a little bit more up close and personal from each of them. And then we will get right into our questions. So going in alphabetical order, I will go the same roster that I just provided. And Beck, tell us a little about you.
Well, thanks so much, Kirk. And first, I'll validate that I found your book very interesting when it first came out nearly 20 years ago, and really was adding to the conversation at a time when, well, maybe starting a conversation, there really wasn't a conversation about what it meant to be an LGBTQ leader. And your book really came into the space and kickstarted that conversation. And kind of bringing that full circle for me, if I had to describe my career journey to you, I would say I've been on a journey to find work that I love, that validates me for who I am, and where exactly who I am is part of the whole skill and superpower I bring to that role. So for me, that meant, starting my career over 30 years ago in a Fortune company as a young, very masculine looking lesbian woman in a closet, working in a very male dominated field in the deep South. And from that place, going on this journey that said, wow, I really love this job and this work and this company, but these people can't know me. I can't be out. It's not safe. And where can I go find that intersection of kind of being uniquely and wholly myself, as well as a person who has all sorts of business acumen and skills to bring to the conversation. And so from there, I went, into athletic wear, where there were more actually lesbians working with me. And we had a whole little group of lesbians that worked in this sporting goods company. And then I was moved into the entrepreneurial space, and for a long time worked in a company that I started with friends that I worked at from the beginning around catering to our own community and making products for the LGBTQ community. And I just kind of worked my way through this whole place to being able to serve as an advocate at HRC, to now being recently at Accenture, a company that hired me with all of those closet doors wide open, busted off the frames, knowing exactly who I am as a transgender man and my history and the conversation and dialogue I bring. And so I'd say that for me, it's all about being who you are and authenticity and finding your own journey to that space.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think the experience that you have is so interesting to me as a researcher, because just of the evolution, but also because this sense of being able, as you say, the closet doors wide open. I mean, I think that's the key, and that's part of this message, that it's so important to be valued for who you are by where we work. And thank you so much for sharing that. I have a million questions in my head. Let me go next to Patty, and I would love to hear a little bit more about your career journey up close and personal.
Yeah, absolutely. First, Out and Equal, thank you for inviting me. Kirk, thank you for moderating this. I think one of the things that's unusual about me is I went to college, I have a broadcasting degree, and guess what? I got a job in my field. So I immediately started at ABC in San Francisco 4 days after I graduated. Real quick story, my dad worked in the same building as the Western Division president of ABC. And I said, Dad, you got to hook me up, like talk to this guy. My dad was like the maintenance guy, right? But I share that because that's kind of like how my career worked up until this day. I was able to get my job at ABC. I worked for two women of color, which was incredibly rare, a Latina and a Chinese American woman who really just, we were in public affairs at a television station. You had to embrace everybody. You had to value everybody. We were the voice of the community. So from the very first job that I had, I felt valued as a person. But what became complicated was about like my layers, because we would do things for the Black community, we would do things for the Asian community, we would do things for the gay community. I'm all of that. And I felt like, do I have to pick? How do I fit into all of this? And so my identity became very complicated, right? I felt like, and people say this, well, you know, be your authentic self, but nothing anyone was doing was encompassing everything that I am, right? And so as I moved forward in my career, I left television, I went into insurance. Guess what? Those bosses that I had in television were my bosses in insurance. I went over to a very large, to Visa, and worked for a woman that I am still tethered with today at BNY Mellon. So I've never felt like I couldn't be myself, but I always felt like I had to kind of switch who I was based on who the audience I was facing. If I was at a Black event, you know, and this and that. And I always had to come out as being Black or being Asian, because sometimes this doesn't necessarily show who I am. So being gay, being a lesbian was almost third, right? Because my physical kind of makeup, kind of people perceived me a certain way, whereas my sexual orientation really was not quite there unless I actually came out and said it, right? So, but today I do diversity work. It's my job to make sure everyone feels like they belong and feel valued. But even today, we do things for the Black community, for the Asian community. We really have to change the focus on how people identify, because we're complicated, right? So that's why I wanted to do this panel, to have that conversation. But that has been a little bit about me.
Patty, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, it's all about these layers, and you really, spoke with that, with such authenticity about that. And I think intersectionality is such a complicated process for others sometimes to recognize, even ourselves. My lens has been expanded so much since I wrote Lavender Road to Success all those years ago. But the value of that intersectionality in terms of, what we bring to the job market, I think if we can recognize that and then help others to recognize that, I just think these layers are so important, because we don't all fit into one box, right? And that's should be seen as something that's spectacular. It's like a superpower, right? When we are part of all of these different groups. So thank you so much for sharing that. And again, a million questions in my head that we're going to dive in around your personal career journey. Next, I'm going to go to Stephen, and love to hear more. Your story fascinates me because you went from corporate to now as an advocate at Out and Equal. So I think you bring such a rich background of experience and a unique lens to this discussion. So giving the floor to you.
Well, thank you for that. It really resonates with me what Patty just said about you see this. And that has always been kind of the situation that I found myself in, that I've always been seen as other. And that is really been my challenge, but it's also been what I've used to kind of leverage, I think, my own career. And I say this because, my dad came here in the 1920s as a 10-year-old boy from China. And so I'm first generation on my dad's side, and on my mom's side, I'm fourth generation. So I'm Chinese, I'm American. But when I was raised, I really wasn't seen as part of the neighborhood. I wasn't part of the school I went to. In fact, there was a petition to keep my family out. And this was in New York. So, all of that experience, I think, lives with me. But at the same time, I think that what I subconsciously knew is that what it felt like to be discounted. I think I always knew what it felt like to be mistreated. And also, unfortunately, the sense of being invisible. So with that being said, when it came time for my career, I came to Bank of America. This was in 1981, and I joined a management training program, which was to be a fast track. And I remember distinctly, I was the only Asian. There was one Black male, there was one woman, and the rest were white men. So, of course, I paid close attention to opportunities that were created for me, whether or not I was being seen the same way as other trainees. And what I realized is that I can't let people define me, that I needed to define myself. And so I think by making that decision, I was able to actually empower myself to represent. And I don't know really where that came from. I think it partially comes from the fact that my dad paved the way for me, and that for future generations, there was something about my needing to play a specific role for others. And so that's where that invisibility needed to be challenged. And I think in doing that, in kind of owning my pride as being Chinese American, in being out, in being HIV positive, all of those things kind of came up throughout my 30-year career. And it actually brought me to Out and Equal in many ways. And I can tell you more about that later. But I feel that by owning my truth, it brought me full circle to where I am today.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think owning that truth is so key to what we're, trying to create for everyone in our community, and the recognition of friends, of allies, of corporate, the workplace, that is so valuable in terms of, what we bring to the table, creating that collective brain, these different perspectives, these different life experiences. And I really appreciate your sharing all of that. I see all of those points that you talk about as part of your superpower, right? In terms of what you bring to the workplace. So thank you so much for sharing that. Chris, I want to hear about your journey and tell us a little bit more about your personal experience. And I thank all of you so much for sharing this, because having other people hook into different parts that they're like, yes, that's my experience, or I relate to that. That is so important in what this event, this panel is all about. So thank you for that. And Chris, love to hear about your experience.
Yeah, sure, Kirk. First, I would like to say as well, thank you to Out and Equal for having me on the panel with so many extraordinary individuals. My journey started a little over 20 years ago when I started in the military. I kind of always knew who I was. I mean, you usually do. But in 1999, coming into the military, there was this thing called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so one of the oaths, part of my oath, I should say, that I had to say right after swearing that I would defend the country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, I also had to say that I would not engage in homosexual activity. And so you learn through the military to walk and talk like everyone else. No one is really allowed to stand out. We all wear the same uniform. We all do the same things. We wake up at the same time, we march. I also deployed during 9/11. So there wasn't really any room for me to be an individual, i.e. be myself. And so I did live a heterosexual life, even though I knew that that wasn't me. That's how my son got here. When I got out of the military, about 6 years into me, first swearing in, I realized it's okay to be myself, but that wasn't like taking a dive into the pool. That was like tapping my toe into the water. I wasn't quite sure of the temperature. So I didn't want a lot of people to know. And I also didn't want my family to know. And it took some time to come out as a lesbian woman. And then I changed my career, took some time, maybe about 10 to 13 years after getting out of the military. I came into corporate. So I've always been in tech. So I made a career change and decided to be a software developer. And I came into corporate, i.e. JP Morgan. And the corporate sector, I was, in my opinion, thinking I need to kind of fall in line like everyone else, because it's what I'm used to doing. And so in my comfort zone, I do not wear women's clothing. I wear menswear. So going to work in a men's suit, kind of paying attention to what other people were looking at when they saw me. I also, don't have the traditional hairstyle for most individuals, right? I wear locks and they're very long. They're down to my waist. And then I started to realize, while I am queer, I don't feel like a woman. And so about a year into my time at the company, I came out to most of the people at the company first, which are most of the people who were in Pride. I came out as non-binary. I just felt like I didn't want to follow along the lines of what everyone thought I should be, right? I was already placed in a box for many years. I was placed in a box by my family. I was placed in a box by the military, which is essentially being placed in the box by the country. And I wanted to be out of the box, and I didn't want to see another box. I didn't want to see a ceiling. I didn't want to see walls. I just wanted to be myself. I didn't want to be masculine. I didn't want to be feminine. I just wanted to wear what I was comfortable wearing and be who I was. And that allowed me to see the insecurities that I had as a superpower. Okay, I have locks and they're this long. I'm Black. I don't wear traditional women's clothing as a person who would look at me and think that I am a woman. And my pronouns are not what people would assume. And so I had to get really comfortable with who I am really quickly if I was going to demand the respect from my peers, as well as the people who I love and love me. And in that, I decided it's time for me to start a fight for individuals who do identify the way that I identify, and who are gender expansive and gender queer, and just want to be a human being. Because at the end of the day, that is what ties us together, right? It's not our culture. It's not our differences in skin tone or hair texture or what we choose to wear and how we choose to express ourselves. It's the fact that we're all humans. And I just wanted to be a human.
Wow. It's so interesting. Early in your career, you were in an environment that rewarded homogeny, which is almost the opposite of who you are and where you are now, in terms of recognizing that all of these different parts of who you are as a human being represent such strength, right? And first of all, I just think all of you are trailblazers, and your experience doing what you're, where you are at, being rewarded for who you are, paving the way for others. Because as we all know, everyone that is out there, many people who are watching this panel don't feel as though maybe they are physically safe, emotionally safe, in an environment where they can recognize that all of these different layers of who we are within the community is something that we should value and recognize as our strength, and let that lead us to, what success is for us in the workplace. So I want to thank you all for paving the way for others. And right before we start to dive into some of the questions, I just want to say to anyone who is listening, pay attention to these folks here, because it is possible to be you and to celebrate you and to be rewarded for the value that you alone bring to the workplace. It is possible. It isn't always easy, but you deserve that. You deserve to be valued for who you are as a human being and be recognized for that value. So you can achieve your dreams, your goals, because they are just as important as anyone else's dreams and goals. So again, I want to thank Out and Equal for doing this, and I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to talk a little bit about leadership as we kick this off, thinking about who we are, all of your life experiences, how that has changed and shifted your approach to leadership, and particularly relative to intersectionality, and how that plays into your approach to engage, your approach to listen, your approach to being present, what that means in terms of your leadership style. So Patty, I would like to start with you and ask you a little bit about your leadership approach and what that really means to be an effective leader, and how intersectionality sort of gets wrapped up into all of that for you.
Yeah, I think it's relatability, right? I think, listen, if I'm in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, and one of the things that I've noticed is, people are more comfortable with you if they know you're like them, right? And so constantly making sure, and I have to say at BNY Mellon, it's probably one of the places where I felt like my Blackness was honored and seen. Obviously, I started there right after George Floyd, and I was brought in to focus on the Black and Brown communities, because I have to tell the folks that are listening that the Black community probably has been the most discriminatory towards me, saying things like, "You're not Black enough, you have that good hair," things like that. And I was really challenged with that my whole life. My dad being very fair skinned, wavy hair, lighter eyes. But, I identify as Black. And then my Japanese mother, I was very culturally Japanese, right? So I feel like in my work, I have to make it very relatable. So whether it's me making sure people know that I have a Black father, making sure I know I have a Japanese, mother, making sure they know I have a wife, right? And then for those that are not in those categories, how do you become relatable to them? And in this space, what I found, and kind of what Chris was saying, we're all human, right? So this empathy muscle, or this tool that we have to say, how you doing? Because we have to meet people where they are. And a lot of times, because I have a bonus daughter, I might talk about raising children, what's it like to be working in this big, firm, and during COVID. So this relatability piece, I think, is really critical, because my job is to gain the attention of people and to hear their opinions about my work. I want them to be super authentic with me. I want them to be truthful with me. I want them to be able to say, I don't get this they, them pronoun thing, right? I don't want them to fake it. And so the way to do that is they have to be comfortable with me. And I will do that either by identity, by experience, by a common goal, right? And then we can work together. So actually my intersectionality works in this kind of sense, right? When it comes to that. And that has been by far, I will call it my strategy. to get the work done, if you will.
Great.
Can I play off something there?
Please, please.
Yeah, so I love everything that you're saying, Patty, and I have a very similar kind of sense of, you know, how my experiences have shaped empathy and listening skills and other things, and how I might use that to create relations with those that I lead. I think what's interesting, you know, we just released a survey called Better to Belong. And one of the things we found, we know that, you know, this is Accenture, we found that, you know, lots of drivers of that business case, right? We're all very familiar with them. But one of the ones we found was that, you know, companies that have been able to increase that sense of belonging, those folks who feel like they belong, that unlocks what we measure as like 5 times human potential, right? Like it really is an accelerator of performance and engagement and all of those things. And that the challenge about scaling belonging is that belonging itself is personal. And so what you need to belong, what I need to belong, what Chris needs, what Stephen needs, what KIRK needs, all may be a little bit different. They're rooted in the same, you know, principles and roots. Like we need psychological safety, because psychological safety allows us to call for those things we need. So as a leader, I'm trying to build that safety ground and some relatability and some doorways opening to safety so that people can tell me what they really need in order to belong, or what their concerns are, or what their colleague did that was boneheaded that made them feel like they didn't belong. And the only way we can get there is through that personal level. And I think that that's what flummoxes, you know, all of us when we think about, you know, we have all this work in inclusion, diversity, belonging, equity, and we do these structural pieces. But getting at that belonging requires all of us as leaders, formal and informal, to create those spaces of safety and relatability to open the doorway to that. And that's the way we're going to scale it. We're going to scale it like one by one.
I think that's so interesting, because if you take a look at belonging as a human need, which, you know, Abraham Maslow casts as part of the hierarchy of human needs. And while that may manifest in different ways for different people, that need is constant. So going back to thinking about, you know, as Chris said, you know, we're all human. How does that all come into play? The other thing that I'm hearing that I think is so interesting is this concept around empathy, because as a communication professor, I tell my students, the way empathy is manifested in our communication dynamics interpersonally is all about listening. People perceive that you care about them, that you value what they have to say if you listen to them. And, you know, talking about we have to meet people where they are, I think part of that requires us to listen. So one thing that I'm hearing is that sense of empathy in terms of the benefit that anyone listening as being part of the LGBTQ plus community is this, and I found this in my own research. I wrote about it in the G quotient, which is there's this heightened sense of people who have walked this walk as part of our community are better able to listen to where other people are, to make other people feel valued for who they are, whatever that you know, equation looks like. So I think this sense of empathy around leadership and meeting people where they are also contributes to education, because as every one of us knows, part of our daily experience is often educating people about who we are. And I think particularly when we talk about intersectionality, because that hasn't been talked about for decades and decades, that we have to think about sometimes before you persuade, you have to inform and educate, and recognizing where people are coming at it from that place of empathy, of listening, opens the door potentially, I think, to, you know, educating and pulling people in and engaging others in our leadership efforts. So around this, Chris, I want to ask you a question, because you were initially in an environment where, you know, individuality wasn't rewarded and you needed to fit in. I think we're at a unique place in history, and I'd love, Chris, particularly because of your experience, to hear your perspective on this around leadership. I see us evolving from a sameness-seeking society to an experience-seeking society. I see that in my own students generationally. I think a lot of the fears that kept us in boxes historically, because human beings are wired, I believe, to fear the unknown. As a result of technology, we're getting educated, and all of these things that we used to be fearful of, as we get to know more about these things, we're like, oh, and I see barriers and walls coming down, and people willing to, you know, branch out and travel to places and experience different things that they might have been afraid to, because it was different. So as we evolve from perhaps a sameness-seeking society, which I view as very much about your early experience in the military, to a more experience-based society where everyone can be rewarded for who they are, including all these different layers of intersectionality. I would love to hear your thoughts around how, as leaders, we can sort of harness all of that for the betterment of others, so they don't have to face the discrimination that others have faced in the past.
Yeah, sure. I think when we think of our own childhood, our own growing up and our own fears, a lot of those fears have been passed down, right? Generation to generation. That's why there was a closet to begin with. I think that the real leaders are this younger generation. I think that they're fearless, and they're teaching us to be fearless and to fight a fight for them as they kind of take on what we are starting. But I think we're leading through their example. And I say that because they're more political than we were. They're more aware than we were. And they are a lot more fearless to be themselves at an early age than we were. And I watch them and I listen. And I'm also listening to this younger generation that's going to come and take over where we are. And it's very important that they never enter a closet that they've never seen. And I think that leadership comes with, a lot of everyone has said it, empathy, the feeling of belonging, right? You can do your best work when you don't have anything to worry about. And a lot of times, most of our worries and insecurities comes from how others perceive us, right? Unfortunately, it's just the way we have been wired, many of us. And I think that when we are sharing how leaders should be, or what is a good example of a leader, it isn't always about delivering. I think in the military, I learned at a very early age, deliver, deliver, deliver. That's a good leader, as long as I get the job done. And that's not always the case, because I've seen leaders deliver and they lose a lot of their personnel because they're not personable, right? They don't know how to empathize with the people that are working for them. Therefore, the morale goes down. People can't give you their all and deliver their best work if they don't feel like they belong, if they don't feel like you don't understand them. And I think a good leader understands that I have to empathize with many different individuals' lifestyles, their home life. I have to be understanding that maybe someone has someone sick that they're dealing with. I have to be understanding that maybe someone has a child that they have to go home to. Not everybody operates like I operate, and that is a good leader. And I think when we are showing good leadership to other people, the best leaders are usually the ones that have dealt with some form of adversity, right? Because they've been on the outside and they know what it feels like, and they don't want anybody else to feel like that, right? The minute you start to feel pain, you don't want someone else to feel pain too, right? That's just how, again, how we're wired. And that's just good leadership, is when you've already felt like you've been on the outside, you look for the people who are on the outside or feel like they're on the outside, and you bring them in, right? And you pay closer attention to them, because the honest truth is, somebody could be your best employee and you'll never know it because they feel like they're on the outside. And you have to find those individuals. And it's, again, it's up to us to use what we've gone through, use our experiences, our trials and tribulations, our struggles, to become these great leaders for however long we're able to, because people are watching us and they're learning from us, and they're going to take what we have done for them or what we are able to do for others, and they're going to use it to mold others after them. So we're setting a standard, as people have done before us.
Absolutely. I love what you say about bringing people on the outside inside as a goal of leadership. I think the other thing around, good leadership is intrinsic motivation. You want everyone to feel, in order to have a productive organization, everyone needs to be optimizing the value, the unique value that they bring to that organization. And I think to create, an end product, if you will, that is going to be better than all of the competitors, you have to have an intrinsically motivated workforce, where that process of work, which includes being valued for who you are in the context that we're discussing it, is part of what is going to make that organization successful. As I heard you, talking about what that feels like to be on the outside, I think anyone who feels that way, it's just not humanly possible to be your most productive, to be your most creative, to be the best you, to be on your A game, because who you are as a human being isn't being valued. So how in the world can I be intrinsically motivated, right? How can I be connected to my work in a way that is going to yield that super successful employment outcome, because I'm not motivated? And I think this goal of bringing anyone who may feel like they are on the outside in is such, an advantage from the organization in terms of whatever their product or service might be that they're providing to the world, because you've got to have that intrinsically motivated workforce. And Stephen, you talked about in your introduction how you shared your stories in all of these different layers of who you are in these different environments and in these different leadership roles that you have had. And I would love to maybe have you share a little bit, or sort of wrap this thought on leadership up around how has, as a leader, you're sharing your personal story impacted others. How have you seen that sort of play out in the workplace? Maybe it was part of educating people, opening doors. Maybe people are hooking into something that, oh, wow, I can relate to that. How has your story impacted others in the workplace?
I think education is a big part of it. And actually, my degree is in education. It's not in banking, it's not in finance. But when it came time to go out into the real world, I wasn't going to be able to make a living as a teacher. But there was a specific reason why I joined the management training program, and that was not to be the boss. It was to be a leader. And in my mind, being a leader was empowering others, just as you do when you're a teacher. And I think it really served me well, because yes, from a business standpoint, I needed to know my stuff, right? I really, especially in banking, I needed to understand everything about banking and the responsibility that I had. But when it came to leading others, I wanted to be a manager to begin with, because I just felt that others had paved the way for me, and that perhaps I could do the same for others. But again, it wasn't about being the boss. It was really trying to find a way to kind of create you know, kind of like an oiled machine where we could work together to get things done. And I remember that in order to do that, we talked about empathy, but also sensitivity and accountability. I think really teaching people that you have to own the decisions that you make. You know, whether or not you pursue your career with the bank, whether or not you want to go after a certain role, if you make decisions that, you know, maybe do not turn out as well as they could, to really, you know, look at that closely. I also always knew that their success was my success. And so that was something that, you know, whether it's just in my personality, that I did not want to think that it was all about me. And also, I think that something we all probably share is treating folks with a lot of humor. And I think that's something that our community has, you know, where humor helps in so many ways, in difficult times as well as in celebratory times. But I would also say that in my being a manager for many, many years, the more you give, the more you have. And so that was just something that I kind of learned over that time. And as far as, you know, being my true self, I don't know what it was, but opportunities always came up. If I was just really clear, I think, about who I was, you know, in this corporate environment, in San Francisco, and also kind of standing up and standing out when there were times to kind of bring my personal self to my professional self. So, you know, I'll use an example at the bank. I remember when there was the California AIDS ride, and which now is AIDS Life Cycle. And we were the first corporate team to ride in the California AIDS ride. And so it was an opportunity for me to participate in something on behalf of the bank and represent. So it was very personal, but it opened eyes, you know, from the corporate standpoint. The same thing with Pride. I was actually, you know, given the opportunity to create the LGBTQ ERG network at Bank of America. And that was in 2007. But I don't think these opportunities would have come to me if it wasn't for just my being open about who I am. And it earned a certain respect that I probably didn't anticipate, but it certainly helped me to thrive in my career.
Great, fantastic. I'm taking a look at the clock here, and we want to make sure that we bring this plane in on time. So I am going to combine a couple of other points and just ask everyone briefly, minute or less. We're coming out of this pandemic. It's a very different time. The world of work has changed because of technology, because of all of the adversity that people have experienced. And we have a lot of young people that are watching. So what I would like for you to think about, that are part of the panel today, to think about the future of work, right? Where we're headed right now in the world. And think, if you were giving young people that are watching this panel right now around this topic, around the power that they bring relative to who they are in all of its layers, what advice around the future of work, around people placing themselves in those careers where they're valued for who they are, just really briefly, what advice would you give those young folks who are watching this panel today for their career? I'm going to go alphabetical again because that's how my brain works. Beck.
Well, first, there's so many opportunities today to engage with companies who want you for who you are. So look at the list of sponsors of Out and Equal, look at the Human Rights Campaign CEI, do your homework, go where you wanted, right? Like that's the first start. The next thing I would say is, as we come out of the pandemic and in this liminal space we're in and where we're headed in terms of that future of work, it's about belonging for sure. And it's about omni-connected experiences and different, ways of connecting. So when I say that, belonging is personal, that's going to mean as workers, as employees, as colleagues, and as leaders, we're going to have to find ways to connect in virtual space, in virtual reality, in augmented reality. Like we're going to be morphing to new and different ways of connecting that still all kind of bring it down to it's relational, it's personal,
Yes.
it's about building connection.
Yes.
And so even as we explore all these different mediums, that's our future. That's the challenge ahead of all of us.
Great. Thank you so much. I agree completely. Patty, minute or less, what advice would you give to the young folks watching?
Yeah, always do exemplary work, always, because that will get you noticed. And I'm going to go back to meeting people where they are. Don't assume that because someone is a CEO, a COO, a CFO, a CAO, whatever they are, that they get this stuff. Give them a little bit of room. If an executive is brave enough to say to you, I don't understand these pronouns, I don't get what gender non-binary is, have empathy and help them along. I think we make the mistake that because someone is at that level that they need to know everything, they don't, because most of them have not lived diverse lives.
Right.
So make yourself a coach and help those folks get there.
Great. Love it. Love it. Stephen, minute or less.
I would say be bold, be brave, be open, and be kind.
I love that. Chris, you have the last word today.
I say educate. And when I say educate, I mean it in this way. You spent money, a lot of money on your education, and that was for your skill set, and that got you in the door. The education of people is the most important education you can ever have, and it is everlasting. And you will always be learning about people. Patty said it best when she said, you need to understand people, right? You need to learn people, ask questions if you don't know, it's okay. What does non-binary mean? What is that about? I don't understand they, them. How do I use that in a context? The best education is the education of people, and that will get you up the ladder.
Awesome. Beck, Patty, Stephen, Chris, thank you so very much. Thank you, Out and Equal. And here's to your success, everyone that's watching.
Thank you, KIRK.